we can start now. So in the last class, we have started our discussion of competitive markets, right? We were discussing the crucial features and we were starting with the solution of one numerical. So anyone having any questions on this part that we have done in the last class regarding the numerical or regarding the concept? Any clarification from anyone? Okay, perfect. So if this is fine with all of you, so in the last class, we have found out the form supply curve, right? Which was having this expression. And it will be 4 plus something when p greater than equals to 5, and it will be 0 for p less than 5, right? So that was part A of the question. Part B of the question was that if there are 100 firms in the market, we want to find the market supply curve. So did any of you give this a try? What might this be? Anyone?
Sir, as we have discussed, they are the homogeneous forms. So the supply, the quantity supplied will be the one from the representative form into the number of forms.
Exactly. So since we are talking about homogeneous forms, all the forms will have the same cost structure and as a result, the same supply function that we have derived. So the market supply curve will be simply this expression multiplied by 100. Okay. So that is just one line to be added over here. So the market supply curve capital S of P would be 100 times this expression 4 plus under root 1.p minus 2 by 0.6 when p is greater equals to 5 and it is 0 when p is less than 5. Okay, is this fine with all of you? All right, so no questions on this part. So now let us move on to the next part of our discussion on comparative markets, where we want to see the effect of taxes on comparative markets. Okay, this is our topic of discussion for today. That if taxes are imposed in the comparative market, then how does the behavior of a comparative market change? And what are the things that we need to be taken care of? All right. So before actually going into this setup, what essentially we want to study is that whether the imposition of taxes in a competitive market is at all beneficial or rather efficient or not. So that means in order to understand that whether imposition of taxes is beneficial or not, we need to compare between pre-tax scenario and post-tax scenario, right? If I want to understand if imposition of tax has benefited means what? It has become better. It will be with respect to pre-tax. That means no tax has been imposed. All right. So whenever we are talking of efficiency in taxation or whether taxation is at all benefiting the market outcome, you always need to compare it with the pre-tax scenario. All right. So just to make it a little bit more clear over here, by pre-tax, I mean t equals to 0, and by post-tax, I mean t strictly greater than 0. Okay, this is the distinction that we want. All right, so let me first define how we are going to write the pre-tax scenario. Pre-tax scenario. That means no tax has been imposed in the market. So in that case, you will define your standard demand function as t as a function of the market price, t prime negative, And the market supply will be defined as capital S, which is a function of the market price, S prime positive. Graphically, if I want to plot this, it will be the standard figure. So this is my graph for the market. On the horizontal axis, I have the market output, and on the vertical axis, the market price. Negatively sloped demand, which is D of P, and positively sloped supply, which is S of P. The equilibrium is obtained over here. Equilibrium price P star, equilibrium market output Q star. Right? The standard setup that we usually do. Now let's come to imposition of tax. Okay. Now we want to define the post-tax scenario. Post-tax scenario. That means I want to consider T strictly positive. Does anybody on this call know about the type of taxes that we usually have? Anyone?
Direct and indirect.
Direct and indirect. Okay. But over here, we are not talking about the demand side, right? So direct taxes are out. Direct taxes are basically ones that directly are taken away from your income. So now, specifically, if I talk of indirect taxes. So let me just give the demarcation that I'm talking about. So basically, when I'm talking of taxes to be imposed on the market, I am basically referring to broadly two types of indirect taxes. Okay. The number one is the per unit tax. Okay. Where a tax of, let's say, rupees T is imposed on every unit sold. Okay. So that means earlier, if your market price for every unit of output was P, at which the market transaction was happening, now the market price will increase to P plus T. Right? For every unit of output that is sold, a rupees P of tax is being deducted by the government. All right. And another way of introducing taxes in this setup would be ad valorem taxes. Ad valorem taxes, a tax of at the rate T% is imposed. So that means on every unit sold basically. So if your initial price was P, in the post-tax scenario, it will become P into 1 plus T. Okay. Can all of you confirm me with a yes or a no if you understand these two types of indirect tax that I have mentioned? Is it making sense?
Yes, sir.
Others, can you also confirm if it's fine?
Yes,
sir.
All right. So these are the two ways in which you can introduce indirect taxes, right? Now, if when I'm talking of imposition of taxes, taxes can be imposed on either the consumers or the producers or both. Right? It can go either way, correct? So to begin with, let us take a simple setup that the tax is being levied on producers, all right? That would be easier for us to start with. So for our purpose, let us take the scenario in this way. Consider a setup where producers are taxed at per unit tax level T. Okay, rupees T. So we are starting off with our first setup. That let us suppose that we are talking about what would happen if sub producers are levied a tax of per unit tax of rupees T. All right, then what will happen? So fundamental thing that we should understand is that when a tax is imposed, the price, the market price is not the price that both the producers and the suppliers are receiving, right? Let's say, for example, that the market price is something 10 rupees per unit. All right. That is the price at which you are doing the transaction in the market, or that is the price at which the consumer is paying for the good. Okay. So out of that 10 rupees, if now the producer has to pay a tax of T, he is essentially getting 10 minus T. Correct? Is it fine with all of you? Is it making sense? The price that the consumer is paying is not the price that the supplier is receiving. There is a gap between these two. And that gap is the rate of tax. If the consumer is paying the market price is, let's say, 100, then obviously the supplier is getting 100 minus T because it has to pay T rupees to the government. Correct? So the fundamental concept over here is introduction of taxes causes a gap between the price paid by the buyers, which I will be denoting as the demand price. Okay. PD, and the price received by the sellers, which I would be terming it as the supply price. All right, PS. Then PD minus PS is equals to T. Right? Can all of you understand this? Can all of you confirm me with a yes or no? If this makes sense, the last expression that I've written. PD is the demand price or the market price at which the goods are being sold. Now the producer has to pay T units of tax to the government. So what was the producer getting? It is PD minus T, or essentially the difference between the demand price and the supply price is T. Okay. Is it fine? Any questions? All right. So this is essentially the relation between the two prices that we are seeing. That means in the post-tax scenario, now it's important to understand that in this new scenario that we are taking, my demand function would be a function of the demand price, and the market supply function will be a function of the supply price. Correct? Producers will decide upon their profit maximizing output based on the price that they are getting, which is the market price minus the tax that they have to pay. Right? So the supply decisions will be taken based on PS, and the demand decisions or the consumption decisions will be taken on the basis of P. Okay. So if, just to make the notations a little bit similar, if the demand price, which is PD, is same as the market price that we put on the graph. So if I denote PD as P, then what will happen? My notation will be changed in this way. The demand function will become D as a function of P, and the supply function will become S as a function of, because supply is a function of PS, and from this expression, what is PS? It is PD minus T, and PD is the market price, so I can denote it as P. So PS is nothing but P minus T. So that means my supply function can now be written as a function of P minus T. Okay. Is it fine with all of you?
Yes,
Making
sir.
sense? Perfect. So in the post-tax scenario, मेरा जो equations है वो कैसे दिखेंगे? Since I have started off with producers having to pay tax, so demand function will remain unchanged. D of P remains D of P in the post-tax scenario as well. But the post-tax supply function now becomes a function of P minus T. So अगर मैं इसको graphically लेके जाऊं तो क्या होगा? S of P is my pre-tax, right? Tax is doing what? It is increasing your cost of production. So that means the post-tax supply function will be pushed to the left.
Will decrease.
Correct? So this is S as a function of P minus T. And if anyone is confused with this, you can think of it in this way. आप कोई एक output level ले लीजिए, मान लीजिए Q1, ठीक है, market output level. Earlier in the pre-tax scenario, in order to sell this much level of output, how much were the suppliers minimum willing to charge? This much. But now, since they have to pay a tax, they need to charge a higher market price, right? उनको मिलेगा इतना ही, but they have to pay a tax, correct? So although they want this, now they have to charge a higher market price. So the gap between the vertical gap between these two curves is T, which is the rate of tax. Correct? So as a result of this, in the post-tax scenario, क्या हो रहा है? आपका equilibrium is shifting from point E to point E dash, where your output is falling to Q double star, and your market price is becoming, let's say, PD star. Okay. Demand price is the market price. So this is the equilibrium price at which the market clears. Now, if I ask you that if PD star is the equilibrium market price, then what is the price that the sellers get? What will you do? You will come to this point E dash and go vertically down on the SP curve. So this is the PS star. And the gap between these two is okay. Any questions from anyone? Got it, everyone? All right. So if this is fine, so this is how diagrammatically it will look. Now we were wanting to compare efficiencies, right? Comparison of efficiency. Pre-tax versus post-sales. Okay. Now let me draw two diagrams side by side. Suppose now if I draw only the pre-tax first. The similar diagram. Market price P, market output Q, negatively sloped demand P of P, positively sloped supply S of P. The equilibrium point is this. and this is P star, and this is Q star. Okay. So efficiency means the total gain by the society, right? Does anybody remember that if I look at the area below the demand curve up till this point, what is this portion known as? Is anyone aware?
Consumer surplus.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. This is the consumer surplus. And why is it the surplus? Let us understand this also once more. आप एक hypothetical level of output ले लीजिए. Suppose Q1. Okay. Corresponding to this level Q1, if you drag up to the demand curve, you will be basically getting a price level. What is that price level? It is the maximum willingness to pay. कि अगर मुझे Q1 level of output मुझे consume करना है, then at max I would want to pay that much on price. Correct? But since the equilibrium price is P star, this discount, so to say, you're getting is a gain to the consumer. So if you come all the way from output level 0 to Q star, ये जो पूरा जो vertical gap मिल रहा है, that is a gain to the consumer. So this is known as the consumer surplus. Correct? And anyone aware of this? The area between the supply curve and the P star line?
Producer.
What is that?
Producer.
Producer surplus. Again, by the same logic, the supply function basically tells you for any given level of output, what is the price that they are minimum willing to accept. उससे ज़्यादा मिल गया तो better. So again, if you look at the output level Q1, they are willing to accept a minimum of this price, the one that is denoted by the supply curve, but they are getting P star. So the vertical gap that is there between the supply curve and the P star line is essentially the gain by the producers, right? So that means this area is nothing but the producer surplus, right? And the welfare of the society is basically consumer surplus plus producer surplus, right? These two areas taken together is what we call it as the welfare. Correct? Is this fine with all of you? All of you understanding this? Any questions? Now, if this diagram is clear with all of you, now let us draw both the pre-tax and the post-tax together in one diagram and compare the welfare implications. Okay. So the next diagram that I will draw on the side is pre-tax versus post-tax. Similars. P over here, Q. And demand function will remain D of P. S of. This is pre-tax. So this gave us the equilibrium point at Q star and P star. Under the imposition of tax on the producers, the supply curve will shift vertically and parallelly to the right. This is S of P minus T, which is post-tax. And the vertical gap between these two is T. Right? The equilibrium shifts to the point E dash, and your equilibrium output is Q double star, and your equilibrium price is PD star. All right? And the suppliers are getting a price of PD star. Correct? Now let me do something. Let me put some names over here so that it's easier for you to understand. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, let's say H. Okay. The corresponding areas I know. All right. So in the pre-tax scenario, the total welfare is all these added up together, because in the pre-tax only the black supply curve is relevant and the total area is addition of everything. Now let's come to the post-tax scenario. What would be the consumer surplus in the post-tax scenario? It is basically the area between the demand curve and the PD star. Correct? This part. Right? Can all of you understand this? Any questions? This is the consumer surplus, because they have to pay a price of PD star. So the consumer surplus is simply A. Correct? Is it fine with all of you?
Yes, sir.
What about the producer surplus?
B plus
Producers are effectively getting, sorry, what? Go ahead. Someone was saying.
I think for B plus C. Yes.
नहीं,
No, no. Only
B और C नहीं. Producer surplus का definition क्या है? The area between the supply curve and the price that they are getting, right? So what is the effective price that they are getting? PS star.
Yeah.
And what is the relevant supply curve? The pre-tax one. So this is simply H. Okay.
So yes, we
बस
would
वही
not
वाला.
consider the post-tax period.
Sorry, what?
Like here,
Don't follow you.
here we will not consider post-tax supply period. Curve.
No, 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 Abhishek. You cannot rate because effectively तो आपको PS star ही मिल रहा है suppliers को.
Okay,
तो
okay, okay.
producer
Got
का
it.
surplus क्या हुआ?
Okay, okay, got it. Like
है ना?
producer are getting only the P staff. Okay, okay, okay. So
Exactly. है ना? तो आपका effectively जो price उसको मिल रहा है
yeah,
उसके
yeah,
respect से तो आप compare करोगे, right?
yeah.
So that is why it is only H.
Yeah, sure.
ठीक है? But when it comes to pre-tax and post-tax setup, आपका एक third economic agent add हो जाता है, which is the government. तो
Yes, yes, yes.
गवर्नमेंट टैक्स रेवेन्यू क्या होगा? हर एक यूनिट के लिए इट इज चार्जिंग टी एंड द मार्केट इज प्रोड्यूसिंग एंड ट्रांजैक्टिंग क्यू डबल स्टार यूनिट, राइट? सो दिस एंटायर एरिया इज बेसिकली योर government tax revenue, correct? So that will become B plus C plus E plus F. All of you understood this? In the post-tax scenario, there is a third economic agent, right? This tax that is collected by whom? It's the government. So the government is also an economic agent who is getting a tax revenue of that total area, because the total output in the market is what? Q double star, and it is transacting or it is charging a tax of T on every unit sold, right? So T into Q double star is basically this area, right? This entire thing taken together. So that will become E plus C plus E plus F. So the total welfare in the post-tax scenario is basically addition of all of them. Correct? These four are from the government part. Got it, everyone? Is it fine?
Yes, sir.
So that means what we can see is that earlier, these two, D and G, these two were earlier accessible to the society. Society को मिल रहा था, producer, consumer और producer दोनों को. But after the imposition of tax, this part is not accessible, right? So this is what we call it as dead weight loss. Correct? So in the imposition of tax, what is the dead weight loss? It is B plus this area. Okay. That means the conclusion that we get from here is that Imposition of tax reduces the welfare of the society because earlier in the pre-tax setup, this much amount of welfare was being accrued to the society. D वाला part आपको consumer को जा रहा था, G वाला part आपका producer को जा रहा था. But now, since after imposition of tax, this part is not accessible to either of them or not achievable, so to say. So this constitutes the deadweight loss to the society. So the conclusion that we get from here is that
Sir,
yes,
sir, like why it is not accessible? मतलब like what rigidities are like.
अभिषेक रिजिडिटी तो ये हो रहा है ना आपका कि पहले आप इन द प्री टैक्स आप क्यू स्टार लेवल तक पहुंच पा रहे थे, बट अभी क्यू डबल स्टार तक पहुंच रहे हो जो कि कम है ना. ये वाला जो डी और जी वाला जो पार्ट है, अगर वो आपको चाहिए तो आपको क्यू स्टार तक प्रोड्यूस करना पड़ेगा, राइट? बट यू आर नॉट बीइंग एबल टू डू दैट because in the post tax scenario, since production has become costlier, the suppliers have increased their prices, as a result of which demand has also fallen. इसीलिए आपका equilibrium shift कर गया, right? From E से E dash on the left.
Okay. So this is happening because of मतलब because of the from the part of the producer, because they are not willing to produce because they are not getting as much as they are getting.
Exactly.
In
Like
a,
I wouldn't say they are not willing to produce, but
yeah,
they are not being able to make up their costs, right? इसलिए वो लोग उतना दूर नहीं जाएंगे.
okay.
Correct. And demand behavior, अगर आप supply का price बढ़ा रहे हो, then obviously the demand behavior is reduce the demand. Correct. And that is what is we are getting graphically. And that is why the equilibrium output in the post-tax scenario is lesser as compared to pre-tax. Correct. So this is what it is. All right. So the deadweight loss to the society is D plus D. So the result that we want to post over here is that imposition of tax reduces social welfare for both producers and consumers. Correct? Because what is this D? It is the welfare loss for consumers, जो पहले उनको मिल रहा था but अभी नहीं मिल रहा है. And this G is the welfare loss to producers.
Yes.
Okay. And one thing to note over here is that हमने जो setup लिया है इसमें हम लोग क्या बोल रहे हैं कि government is levying tax on only the producers at a per unit rate of T. है ना? But the outcome that we are getting is that even if the producers are only having to pay the tax, welfare of the consumers are also falling. ऐसा नहीं कि बस उसके ऊपर दिया है इसीलिए बस producers are suffering. है ना? It's not that case. Consumers are also having to bear the burden of tax. Okay. Now coming to this terminology once more, burden of tax. What is the burden of tax? If you look at these two diagrams side by side, the idea is very simple. In the pre-tax scenario, आपका equilibrium price था P star, correct? But after the imposition of tax on the producers, market price P star से PD star हो गया, right? This is the increase in the market price, correct? So earlier, the consumers, if we think from their side, they were having to pay P star, but now they have to pay PD star. So typically, if I ask you that what is the burden of tax on consumers? Burden of tax on consumers. It is simply the price differential, right?
Yes, yes.
Correct? And in the exact similar way, can anyone tell me what would be the burden of tax on producers? Anyone? Just look at this diagram once more. In the pre-tax scenario, the producers
Yeah.
were getting P star, but
P star minus PS star. P star, yes.
exactly P star minus P star. That's it. So this is essentially the burden of tax that the consumers have to bear or the producers have to bear. Okay. Now comes this question. I would put it as bullet point one, that if the first wax is greater than the second one, what can you say? Any economic meaning that we can put to this? अगर ऐसा सिनेरियो हमें देखने को मिलता है, then what would we conclude from this, or what can we understand from this?
The burden on tax or burden of tax on the consumer is higher than that on the producer.
Exactly. Correct. The burden of tax is higher on the consumers. Burden of tax higher on consumers. All right. And the second one, if it's the other way around, anyone? What would that mean? If the inequality is the other way around?
Burden is on the producers.
Yes, it's on the higher side on the producers. Okay. So this is this. So now with these two inequalities understood by all of you, the next question that comes in, कैसे समझ में आएगा कि for any given tax setup किसके ऊपर burden ज्यादा होगा, है ना? That is the next question. So how to calculate that? Who will have the burden more? Let me draw one graph for all of you just to explain the idea. Okay, so this is my market again, the same graph, P and Q. Okay, and I would request you all to draw two demand curves. One a little bit, I wouldn't say flat, but a slightly relatively flatter, and one relatively steeper. Okay, I just want to explain two cases. That's it. That's the only thing. Okay, let's say I call this D1 and I call this D2. And just to keep the diagram neat and clean, I am only drawing the post-tax supply curve. I'm not drawing the pre-tax. I hope you all understand. You will have another pre-tax as well. Okay. Or rather, I can draw that as well. It's fine. Shouldn't be that confusing. Yes, of course. Okay. Let's take D1. If D1 is the original demand curve, your equilibrium price would be over here, P star, correct? And given the supply function, given the post-tax scenario, this will be your post-tax demand price. So this is the burden that you have to bear. Correct? Got it, everyone? Is this fine? If the demand curve is D1, then P star is the point where it's meeting the S of P. This is your pre-tax price, and the price point where it is meeting the S of P minus T curve, that is your post-tax price. So the gap between these two is the burden on tax on consumers. Correct? Now, if it is D2, suppose. In case of D2, this is where your equilibrium will be. Correct? Can all of you understand this? Let's say I call this E double dash. Okay. Is it fine? And under this new demand curve D2, if taxes is imposed, this is where your new price will be. Now, can you more or less understand from the diagram that in this case, the gap is more in comparison to the first case?
Yes, sir.
Correct? Can all of you understand this? Others, can you all confirm me with a yes or a no if this is making sense?
Yes, sir.
Correct. So that means if I hypothetically, let's say, draw another demand curve, which is much steeper than this. Let's say something like this, T3. Then what will happen? The gap will increase further. Correct. So for the consumer side, what I am trying to show you all is that steeper the demand curve, more will be the consumer's burden of tax. Am I correct on this? Do all of you agree with this?
Yeah.
Correct? Steeper the demand curve, more will be the burden of tax on consumers. And to put it in a little bit more in a economic language, so to say, more inelastic the demand curve, more will be the burden of tax on consumers. Okay, so let me just write this down. That means more. Sorry, what?
Less response because of less responsiveness.
Exactly. More inelastic the demand curve, greater will be the burden of tax on consumers. Okay. So that means the burden of tax, this idea that we were trying to discuss, essentially depends upon the elasticities of the demand and the supply curves. So can anyone take a quick guess? When might the burden of tax be higher on the producer side? What might be the underlying reason for that?
More elastic supply curve.
More inelastic.
More inelastic supply curve. Right?
Yeah.
Inelastic means the responsiveness is less. So that is where the gap increases. Okay. So I'm writing this down as well. And similarly, more inelastic the supply curve, greater will be the burden of tax on producers. Okay. So if I go through this entire discussion once more, the first thing is, if we want to understand or compare the outcome of tax, we need to compare it with pre-tax versus post-tax. On comparison, we find that the imposition of tax causes a deadweight loss. So that is the inferior outcome. The moment this deadweight loss has been addressed for, we understand that not only producers but also consumers are having a component in the deadweight loss. And given that idea, we are seeing that both the consumers and producers have to bear a burden of tax, which is given by the difference in prices that they have to face. And what would be the share of burden that each of them have to bear? That is depending on the elasticities of the demand and the supply curves. Okay. So this is the, I would say, the major implication of imposition of taxes. So is this fine with all of you? Any questions that anyone might want to ask on this part? Any doubts on anything that we have just discussed? Okay. So if this is fine with all of you, let me leave you all with one question for today as homework, and we will take this up in the next class with the solution. Okay. A representative firm in a competitive market is having the cost function Ci as a function of Qi is equals to 0.1 Qi squared plus Qi plus 10. And there are 100 firms in the market. Okay. I'll add two parts to the question. Find the firm supply and the market supply. And the second part, if the market demand curve is D is equals to minus 400p plus 4000, find the equilibrium price of the market. Okay. Just give this a question a try, all of you. And in the next class, I will be discussing this solution and taking our discussion forward on the taxes part. Okay.
Okay.
So that's it for today's class, all of you. Any questions from anyone? Okay. So we can stop the screen share. Thank you everyone for joining. See you all in the next class. You all can disconnect. Thank you.
Thank you,
Sir,
sir.
hello.
Yes. Yes.
Sir, yesterday I asked one question, sir. You told that today you will discuss it actually. So,
Yes, Shubhrato. Can you just repeat it once?
sir, my question